You're standing in the checkout lane with a cart you swore would be light this time. You came for milk, eggs, maybe bread. The total flashes, $112. You stare at the screen. You don't remember picking up that much. You don't even remember half of what's in the bags, but you're not careless. You're not impulse-driven. So why does this keep happening? You walk to your car feeling like you missed something obvious. Like if you just paid better attention, you would have caught yourself. But you were paying attention. You looked at prices. You made deliberate choices. And somehow, you're still holding bags worth twice what you planned to spend. The confusion doesn't fade on the drive home. It settles in as a quiet frustration. Not dramatic, just persistent. Most people think grocery overspending is about lack of discipline. They blame themselves for grabbing the fancy crackers or the third box of snacks. They think the problem is impulse control, and if they just paid better attention or stuck to a list, they'd walk out spending what they planned. It's a reasonable conclusion. After all, you're the one pushing the cart. You're the one making the selections. So when the total comes back higher than expected, it feels like a failure of focus. Like you should have been more careful, more intentional, more restrained. That framing makes sense because most of the spending advice you encounter is built on the same assumption, that controlling spending is about controlling yourself. You see lists titled 10 Ways to Stop Impulse Buying or How to Stick to Your Budget. The implied message is always the same. The problem is you, your attention, your willpower, your ability to resist. And when you internalize that message, every trip that ends with a higher than expected total becomes another piece of evidence that you're not disciplined enough. Another data point in a pattern that feels like personal failure. So you resolve to do better, to focus harder, to be more strict. And for a trip or two, maybe you are. But then the pattern returns, and the frustration builds again. But that's not the whole picture, because the actual mechanism at work isn't about your discipline at all. It's about how grocery stores are structured to make accurate spending prediction almost impossible, not through manipulation, not through deliberate psychological tricks designed to exploit you. Through something more fundamental, the sheer volume of micro-decisions you're forced to make in a compressed window of time, without the feedback you need to course correct. You're essentially navigating a system where the final cost is hidden until the moment it's too late to adjust. And that's not a personal failing. That's a structural reality. The problem isn't that you're bad at controlling yourself. The problem is that you're trying to track dozens of individual decisions in your head simultaneously without tools in an environment specifically designed for variety and choice. No amount of discipline changes the fact that human working memory can't reliably hold that much information at once. You're being asked to do something cognitively difficult and then blaming yourself when it doesn't work perfectly. The issue isn't moral. It's mechanical. Think about it this way. When you walk into a grocery store, you're not making one purchasing decision. You're making dozens, maybe hundreds, depending on how long you're there and how much you need. Every aisle presents a new category. Every shelf presents options within that category, and every option requires a small calculation. Do I need this? Do I want this? Is this worth it? How much is left at home? Is there a better version of this I should grab instead? Most of those decisions feel minor in the moment. $1 here, $3 there, $5 for something that seemed useful. You're not pulling out your phone to track each one because that would be absurd. It would slow you down. It would turn grocery shopping into an accounting exercise. So you move through the store, filling the cart and trusting that you'll land somewhere reasonable. You have a general sense of what things cost. You're making choices that feel proportionate. And yet, when you reach the register, the total is somehow much higher than the sum you were tracking in your head. Here's what's happening. Each small decision compounds. And because you're making them in real time without a running total, you lose the ability to course correct. By the time you reach the register, the spending is already locked in. There's no moment halfway through where you pause and realize you're at $80 when you meant to spend $60. The feedback comes at the end, when it's too late to put things back without feeling embarrassed or wasting time. You could, in theory, ask the cashier to remove items, but that requires holding up the line. It requires admitting in a semi-public way that you miscalculated. It creates friction. So most people just accept the total, swipe the card, and move on. The system doesn't correct you until correction becomes socially awkward. That's not an accident of design. It's just how the format works. And it works against accurate budgeting every single time. Let me walk through what this looks like in practice. This is just an illustration, not a rule, but it shows how the pattern unfolds. Say you go in planning to spend around $50. That feels doable, reasonable. You grab the basics first: milk, eggs, bread. That's maybe $12, give or take. Then you remember you're low on coffee. Not out completely, but low enough that you'll need it soon. You grab a bag, another $8. You're at $20, which still feels well within range. You pass the produce section and pick up bananas, some greens, maybe tomatoes, and an onion. Another $10, you're at $30 now, still on track, still comfortable. Then you turn down the snack aisle because you genuinely need something for lunches. You grab crackers, standard choice. Then you see the granola bars on sale. They're not on the list, but they're useful, and the price seems good compared to what you usually pay. It feels like a smart decision, not an impulsive one. Another $8. You pass the canned goods and remember you're out of beans and pasta, and maybe tomato sauce, or at least you're running low. You grab all three. Another $10. Now you're at $58, but you don't know that yet because you haven't been manually adding. You just have a vague sense that you're picking up normal things at normal prices. Nothing feels excessive. You swing by the frozen section for vegetables. Peas, maybe broccoli, standard stuff. Another $6. Then you see the frozen pizza that's on sale. It's not a treat. It's dinner for later in the week when you're too tired to cook. That's practical. Another $6? You're at $70 now. You remember you're almost out of butter, cheese, and yogurt. Dairy adds another $12. You're at $82, but you still don't have a running count because nobody does that unless they're actively trying to prove a point. On your way to checkout, you pass the bakery. Fresh bread. It smells good. You already have bread in the cart, but this is different. Artisan. Real. It feels worth it. Another $5. You grab a bottle of juice in the refrigerated section near the register because you're thirsty and it seems reasonable. Another $4. Final total, $91. You planned for $50. Ended up at nearly double. And when you look at the receipt, there's nothing on it you regret. Every single item made sense in isolation. But the cumulative effect was far beyond what you intended. This isn't a failure of willpower, it's a failure of information. You made reasonable choices at every decision point, but without a running total, those reasonable choices compounded into an unreasonable outcome. Now contrast that with almost any other spending context. When you're shopping online, the cart total is always visible. It updates instantly. You can see exactly where you are before you commit. When you're at a restaurant, you see the menu prices before you order. You know what the meal will cost. You can adjust before the bill arrives. When you're budgeting for rent, a car payment, or a subscription, the number is fixed and clear. You know what you're committing to. There's no surprise. Grocery stores don't work that way. The format of the experience makes it nearly impossible to track spending in real time unless you stop after every item and manually calculate. And most people don't do that. Not because they're careless, but because it's impractical and mentally exhausting. You'd have to pull out your phone, open a calculator, and add line by line while standing in the aisle. That's not realistic. So instead, you estimate. You make rough guesses, and those guesses compound into errors that only become visible when it's too late. This creates a psychological pattern that's hard to escape, because every time you overspend, you interpret it as a personal failure. You tell yourself you'll be more careful next time, you'll stick to the list, you'll avoid the middle aisles, you'll only buy what you absolutely need, and maybe you do, for one trip, maybe two. But then, life happens, you're tired, you're hungry, you forgot to meal plan, someone at home asked you to grab something extra, and the same dynamic plays out again. Not because you're undisciplined, but because the structure hasn't changed. The problem isn't that you lack control, it's that you're trying to solve a structural issue with behavioral correction. And that doesn't work long-term because the structure doesn't change. You can white-knuckle your way through a few trips. You can force yourself to be hyper-vigilant, but that's exhausting, and it's not sustainable. Eventually, you relax, and when you relax, the default pattern reasserts itself. The grocery store doesn't get easier to navigate. Your memory doesn't get better at holding 15 price points simultaneously. The system remains exactly as it was, and so the outcome remains exactly as it was. What changes, though, is your relationship to the stress. Because once you realize the overspending isn't about weakness, you stop carrying the guilt. You start seeing it for what it is, a predictable outcome of making too many decisions with too little feedback. That doesn't make it less frustrating. It doesn't make the money come back, but it does make it less personal. And that shift matters more than it seems, because when you stop blaming yourself, you stop cycling through the same failed solution. You stop thinking the answer is just trying harder. You stop beating yourself up for not being perfect, and you start thinking about how to change the inputs instead of constantly trying to change yourself. That's not resignation, it's clarity. And clarity opens up options. The guilt was never helping you spend less, it was just making you feel worse. Removing the guilt doesn't remove accountability. It removes the emotional static that prevents you from thinking clearly about what's actually happening. When you're not busy feeling ashamed, you can start noticing patterns. You can start asking different questions. Not, why can't I control myself, but what would need to change for this to work differently? That's a question with answers. The first question just leads to more self-blame. The second question leads to adjustment. Maybe that means shopping with a running total on your phone. Maybe it means ordering groceries online where the cart is always visible. Maybe it means going to the store more often with a shorter list so there are fewer decisions to track at once. Maybe it means shopping at stores with fewer options so the decision load is lighter. Maybe it means accepting that grocery spending will fluctuate and planning for a higher baseline instead of trying to hit an unrealistic target every week. None of those are prescriptions. They're just examples of what it looks like to work with a system instead of fighting it. The point is that once you stop treating this as a character issue, practical solutions become visible. You stop thinking you need to become a different person. You start thinking about how to give yourself better tools. The point isn't to find the perfect method. The point is to stop treating this like a character flaw and start treating it like a design problem. Because once you see it that way, the shame drops away. And what's left is just a practical question. Given how grocery stores work, what's a realistic number, not an aspirational one? Not the number you wish you could spend if you were perfectly disciplined and made zero mistakes. The number that actually reflects how you shop, how often you go, and how many decisions you're making per trip. For some people, that's $75 per trip. For others, it's $120. The exact amount doesn't matter as much as you think. What matters is that it's based on reality, not intention. Because intention doesn't account for the 30 small decisions you'll make between the entrance and the register. Reality does. And when your baseline is rooted in reality, you stop being surprised. You stop standing at the checkout feeling confused about how you got there. You know how you got there. The system made precise tracking nearly impossible, and you didn't compensate with external tools because most people don't. That's not a moral failing. It's just what happens when human memory meets a high-decision environment without real-time feedback. That's not an excuse to spend recklessly. It's just an explanation. And explanations reduce stress. They give you clarity. They let you plan around the actual problem instead of endlessly trying to fix yourself. You can adjust your budget. You can change how you shop. You can use tools that give you the feedback the store doesn't provide. But you can stop thinking the issue is that you're not disciplined enough, because discipline was never the bottleneck. The bottleneck was information. And once you see that, you stop fighting yourself. You start working with what's actually true. You're not broken. The feedback loop is,